Welcome to the September 20th, 2018 Board of Education meeting. We've been in executive session since 6 o'clock discussing an individual personnel matter, a student matter, and a contractual discussion in regards to district property. And we will now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we do introductions?
Dave first.
Chris Meyer.
Christine Beck. Jody Monroe.
Michael Cooper.
Holly Dellenbaugh.
Meredith Mehardy.
Willow Bear. And Judy Kehoe.
And Jonathan Fishbein is out of town, so he couldn't be here this evening. We wanted to thank Mr. Klugman for hosting us and the rest of the staff of the middle school for getting this all set up for us. Thank you, Mike. And I see we have a number of participation in government students. Your obligation is to stay until 9 o'clock if the meeting goes that long. If it does, we'll take a break at that time so you can come up and sign out on the sheets up here. And if you need anything signed for your teacher, you can ask us. Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the September 5th, 2018 regular board meeting?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Okay, superintendent's report.
Sure, thank you. I have a few things. The first thing I wanted to just quickly review with the board was the elementary enrollment. Brittany, can you pull that slide up? So this is, are the current sections that we have as of today, basically. So you can see that first column is, it says the company's K projection. That's from the Capital Region Planning Commission. So you can see that our numbers are really quite good across the board. And I know, Meredith, you had asked about particularly grade 4.
Yeah.
So we had, after the cutoff date, there are 8 fourth graders whose home school is Slingerland and went to other schools. But what's unique about this, we don't typically have a lot of movement in grade, but 5 of them were at Ellesmere. And during the summer, families bought homes in the Slingerlands catchment, and so they're staying at Ellesmere.
Okay.
So, and then there was a couple of those families had students in other grade levels. One opted to have that student go to Slingerlands, and the other to have both of their children at Ellesmere. So the 4th grade was a little unique in that regard, but overall the numbers are really good. We have a lot of capacity in many of the buildings. And keep in mind, Glenmont and Slingerlands have been the 2 schools that we had ENL services at, but this year we began ENL at Eagle as well. So we'll have 3 of our schools will have ENL, so that will hopefully balance that out a little bit better.
Do we have a limit on the number of students per classroom?
So at the bottom, we don't have a limit, but we have a guideline that we developed several years ago. We had a committee to review that, and we try and stay around that number. Sometimes we've been over by 1, or sometimes you can see a lot of them were under by quite a bit.
How do you make the decision to either overflow children to another school, or to create a 3rd section within a specific grade?
Usually after the budget and after the enrollment deadline, we wouldn't typically create another section. We've never had to, because we've always had capacity in the other buildings. So we don't typically, plus there's also a lot of scheduling. You think it's just easy to add another section, but we have traveling teachers for specials. The lunch schedules are already done. So it's not just like you create a section and there's not a domino effect.
Okay.
Since I've been, at least since the last 10 years, we've never added another section because we've always had capacity in other buildings.
Okay.
So typically, we look at what buildings have more capacity. Sometimes it's, if students are ENL, they would go to Glenmont or Slingerland's. And then it comes down to makes the most sense for transportation to not have the students on the bus for long periods of time.
Okay. Great, thank you.
And I think also the numbers for the guidelines have gone down, because I think fifth grade used to be at 28.
No, those have been there for probably 8 or 10 years.
Okay,
The
so those are the
numbers,
ones.
they haven't
Okay.
changed.
But we have been as high as 28, 29.
Particularly during the recession, we went over because we were cutting staff.
Okay.
So, but we
And-
have not really been over much, maybe by one student in the last few years.
And are teachers involved in that process of of creating those guidelines?
Teachers were involved,
Okay.
parents were involved, administration was
Yeah.
involved.
Okay.
And how's the 22 at Eagle? I know we've had discussion around kindergarten before. I think the optimal number they've been saying is like 19, like 22 seems to be,
There's no research
no,
that supports that.
but it seems to be okay. Nobody's
I-
saying it's.
I haven't heard it. I'm sure if you're a kindergarten teacher, I don't disagree with that.
Like 22 is a lot of
16
kindergarten.
kids versus 22 is probably a lot better, but that's what the recommendation was and has been.
Thank you.
So, the next item I wanted to bring up, I provided an update from actually Mr. Klugman. He had requested that we reinstate the co-curricular position of the technical director for stage creations for the coming year because of the number of students who were involved last year, and this year Mr. Riley anticipates 60 to 80 students involved in that. So typically, this position would be added during the budget process, but because the budget process isn't going to happen until after this, it's a couple $1,000s, if I don't even think it's that much, to add this position. So if the board is okay with it, or if you have any questions, I would like to put it on the next board agenda to reinstate the position, which would then allow Mr. Klugman to post it prior to the production happening.
Sounds good. He looked a little harried last year from all the kids.
I'd be fine with it.
Yeah. The more hands, the better.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so that'll be on the next board agenda. And then the last thing I just wanted to provide the board with is a quick update on the strategic planning process and where we are. There you go. So last year, we began our strategic planning process. We are on schedule we're hoping around February, the beginning of February, for a public release. So we would be presenting to the board the final product. So we've currently developed the mission statement. We've identified 4 core values and goals areas, identified different objectives, strategies, and metrics for how we'll measure success for the next 5 years. So currently, we don't have a strategic plan. We've been setting annual goals, and we've been using the values that were identified several years ago of knowledge, character, and value. The strategic plan moving forward would help guide the district decision-making through 2024. We have core values and goal areas identified in 4 core areas for academics, character, community, and wellness. And the annual goals would be set using their strategic plan as a guide. So this is a kind of a draft of the document we've been working with that we would want to, something along these lines, to share out with the community. The mission statement is at the top: to educate and prepare all students to reach their potential, discover their purpose, and be engaged community members. And then the 4 core values are listed on the pillars: academics, character, community, and wellness, with descriptors of each of those. And in each of those areas, you can see we highlighted different areas that we would then set goals for. So for example, in academics, you can see there's 4 or 5 related to equity and access, character related to student leadership, respect, inclusiveness, community, looking at the communication, participation, partnerships with communities, with our community, and in wellness, health and fitness, mindfulness, social emotional learning. So this is kind of a draft of what the document that we've been working with looks like. So in academics, we've identified that's the instructional and assessment practices that are aligned to a strong and relevant curriculum. And we have something like this for each of those core areas, and then identified the major components of that, and then below you have the major strategies. So how would we actually get there? In highlighting a few of those major strategies. And then, for example, below that, with how would we measure success, we would want to identify 2 to 3 maybe key components to measure that we think the community would like to see as part of that. So for example, we don't have metrics in there yet because this is still a working draft, but what is our 3rd grade reading achievement now, and what would we want it to be in 2024? What's our current graduation rate, and what do we want it to be in 2024? So this is an example of kind of where the direction the group is going. And this is just a review of the timeline. So we began last fall, and you can see we are on track. We met, the strategic planning group met in August for half a day to really spend some time working on that. So we're at the point now where they asked us to go back to the instructional team, administrative team, to recommend some metrics to include in the document that we would want to share with the public. So we have 3 other meetings this fall with the strategic planning committee, with our goal, hopefully, if we stay on track, that we would be able to provide that to the Board of Education sometime around January for review and approval. And that's the update. And Holly and Chris are both on the committee, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
I'll just say I think it's been a good collaborative process so far, really pulling together ideas from different stakeholders and people with different opinions about how we should put these together to move forward.
Great.
Okay, that's my report.
Okay. And on behalf of the board, we'd like to thank the committee for all their hard work so far. They really have been working very hard on this. Okay, next is the Board of Education report. I guess I'll go first. The policy committee will be meeting next Monday, and we have a rather lengthy list of policies we're going to be looking at. Some of them are just sort of cleanups. They haven't been reviewed in far too many years. But the board had asked that we let you know what policies we'll be looking at so that you can review them, and if you have any recommendations or suggestions for our review. So I'll go through the list very quickly. It's policy 1130.1, social media guidelines. 1130, media relations policy. 1420, complaints about curricula or instructional materials and the regulation that goes with that. Policy 1800, donations, gifts, and grants to the district. 1925, interpreters for parents with hearing loss, which also has exhibits with it. 4831, service animals. 4855, therapy dogs, which was the social service dogs policy that we drafted last year. We've made some more revisions to that. 6700, purchasing and the regulation and exhibits that go with that. 8413, I assume this is, I don't know, .2, we'll have to check this number, but it's transportation to childcare locations. And the last one is 8505, meal charge policies. And I know the board has had some discussions about reviewing the conflict of interest policy. Currently, our attorneys are reviewing that, and once we get their comments back, we will add that onto the agenda for an upcoming policy committee meeting. So that's all I have. Does anybody else have anything?
Go ahead.
I attended the Best of Bethlehem art exhibit reception for artists K through 12 that was at the high school, and I was very impressed by all of the different art that I saw there. There's a wide range and of elementary through high school, and I really enjoyed seeing all of it. So I congratulate all the artists and the art teachers.
Nice display. Next Monday, we have an audit committee meeting, and Judy, correct me if I'm wrong, we're reviewing the external auditor's report during that meeting. And then also, I'm filling in for Willow, I believe, for the Start School Later committee, so that's occurring next week as well.
Wednesday.
Wednesday. It's a good reminder.
Sure. Two quick things. One, I'm putting a plug in for the PTA. Beginning of the year, I want, there's just certain numbers of parents that do so much, and that number in certain places is dwindling, and the numbers are becoming fewer and fewer, and we want to get more and more people involved in the PTA. The PTA, particularly at the elementary levels, does so much. All those fun activities, all the holiday events, some of the socials, all the events that go on at the elementary school, the PTA puts hours and hours in, and there really is a big push to get new members in. So it's something to, first join the PTA, but then also, work with them, even if it's just one event that you could volunteer at. They would greatly appreciate that. And speaking of one event, this Sunday is the Ham McGrail School Picnic, and it is a great event, and I'll put a plug in for that, and also say that it really is a testament to the staff, the teachers, the administration, that at that they have a raffle. And the most important raffle prize, that is the last one raffled out, is the lunch with Mr. K. And that is the true prize of the event. And students will want to put all their tickets in just for that one. And so, the fact that we have our students who want to have lunch with the principal just shows what a great staff we have here and what a wonderful community.
Yeah. Anyone else? No? Okay. Next, we'll move on to our presentation. It's on BC's continued focus on student engagement, and the presentation will be by Mr. Klugman, the middle school principal.
Nick, is this good? Can you hear me? Great. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Klugman. I'm the principal of the middle school. Joining me tonight is Mark Warford, also our assistant principal in the back of the room. Also joining us is our security blanket today. We have Miss Gail Farman. Gail is the developer and the principal behind Passport for Good, which we'll be talking about tonight. So if there's any questions I can't answer, we've got Gail here to support us. Quick straw poll of seniors in the room. How many of you guys are familiar with Passport for Good and have actually started using it this year? Show of hands. Awesome. And how many people have actually started their community service already? Great, and you guys are logging your hours through that, so we'll get into that. Today we're going to talk about the history of Passport for Good and where we think it's going to go, not just with our seniors. So Passport for Good is a software app that was developed by Gail with a lot of feedback from people in the education community. It serves, I would say, three masters. It serves the student principally to help them keep track of all of the things that they're doing that could go toward college and career and speak to how well-rounded they are. It serves the organizations that they assist. So, for example, at the high school, we have a lot of students that are involved in Key Club. It helps Key Club organize their events. It helps Key Club keep track of their participation. It also helps them announce events. And then lastly, it serves the district to tell us who's involved, how many students are involved, what our most productive outlets are for engagement on the part of students. And we think some of the advancements that I'll speak to and that Gail may be able to help us with in describing will help us further get a deeper dive into some of those numbers. So we're really excited by that stuff. First and foremost, as Jody described in the strategic planning process, for the last 2 years, we've been aligning district goals and becoming more and more granular to define how those goals create measurables in each of our buildings. So this slide's pretty dense. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You'll note way down in the right-hand corner, though, there's a reference to Passport for Good as being one of the vehicles we'll use to collect some of this data. So this year, for example, at the middle school, we'll be using Passport for Good to measure student engagement, participation in things like athletics, sports, music activities, and extracurriculars both in and outside of the school. And we'll be teaching students how to use that, the app to track those things. This is some of our community goals. This is one of our slides. Again, reference to Passport for Good way down on the lower right. In our community domain, we start introducing students to community partnership at a really bare bones level at the middle school. It really picks up at the high school. So I'll talk about the various categories that Passport for Good is now going to allow us to track. One of those really important ones is internships. So when our high school students go out and they get real world internship experience, they'll be able to record that through Passport for Good and translate that right into college applications and resumes. So a little bit of a historical perspective. 8 years ago, Nick Petriccioni, who was our K-12 social studies administrator, myself back when I was science administrator, and Jody back when she was the assistant superintendent, discussed the potential for logging service and participation hours district-wide beyond just our seniors. We had no mechanism for doing that, and that was largely Nick Petriccioni. 20% of his role was tracking all of this stuff by hand for all of our seniors. And it's not only paperwork, it was Nick validating and confirming with the folks that were providing community service hours. So Nick would in some cases get on the phone with those folks to make sure that our students were fulfilling and documenting the right things. Passport for Good has brought us forward and takes care of most of that now. 4 years ago, Jody, Nick, myself, and A.G. Irons, who's a teacher at the high school, started conversations with Gail about this development of an electronic medium that could do a lot of this stuff for us. And I think I speak for all four of us. When we weren't sure, what the mechanisms and features of the app would be, and Gail's really taken this from, she started by herself all alone with an idea, and she's an inspiration to students who might have the idea to go into business for themselves and start a corporation and develop something like this. And I think we're going to see this explode. I mean, I think it's got that much potential, which you'll see as we get into the slides. So 3 years ago, AG actually began piloting the use of Passport for Good with select groups of seniors as an option for their service verification. Not all seniors had to do it that year, but the seniors that did had a really easy time tracking their hours. And it worked really well for AG. It saved a lot of time for him as Nick started to turn some of that responsibility over to the teachers. 2 years ago, we adopted Passport for Good as the mechanism for logging all senior community service hours. And then also, Mark started using Passport for Good at the middle school with his garden club students, as well as some other teachers in both buildings started using Passport for Good on a limited basis. And then last year, after the initial setup and indoctrination of staff and students in training on how to use Passport for Good, Gail started to take feedback on, streamlining it, designing an app that would be user-friendly on phones, and fast forward to the 2018-19 school year, and we have a new interface that's coming out perhaps literally as I speak, so they're that close. And it eases the use. So the user-friendliness of the app gets that much better because it now is cross-platform. It works for both teachers, off-site facilitators, students, and will facilitate a data collection process for the district too, all while guaranteeing the privacy of student accounting, student records, and student information. As I said, it serves both the students in tracking all of their activities. Very often we find as school district personnel, and in some cases even parents, that when our kids have to go back and actually fill out their college resumes, they've forgotten a lot of stuff that they've done. So this helps students as soon as they start logging this stuff. It could be as young as joining the Girl or Boy Scouts in second and third grade. They can track this stuff literally as they go. And it's amazing when you look at the kids who are active and using this to record all of their stuff. We've got some goals for students that we're putting in front of them this year. We've got students that are exceeding our goals of, getting 5 hours of community service at the middle school by 10 times that amount because they're so active either with their parents or with a group, with a school group, or with an outside group. So how the process work? A new extracurricular service attendance check-in feature will streamline student and facilitator process. We'll be able to check students in when they show up to events through basically an attendance function. We're also hopeful about the potential for Passport for Good to do something very similar to what LinkedIn does with proficiencies, if you're familiar with LinkedIn. We hope that they'll be able to build badges so students can get recognition for some of the things that they've done that go beyond community service. So one of the things that we talked about, Mark and I talked about with one of Gail's developers, was, for example, wouldn't it be phenomenal, and they're not there yet, they may develop this at some point in the future, be able to take our 24 character strengths and give teachers the ability to spot strengths in kids by just going into the app and logging that for a particular student. So every time we see, for example, a student do something altruistic or benevolent, we can log that into Passport for Good and they get a little badge for it. So it's almost like a caught being good thing, right? Again, serving the school and district. One of the data points that we think we'll be able to capture out of this is translating the number of hours that students participate through whatever community service they do into an actual dollarly amount or a dollar amount that we can reflect back on how we've helped our community and what entities we've actually helped in the community, because we'll have a record of all those different groups that our students have served. And typically, I think it's probably more the norm that our seniors are going outside the district to do the things that they're doing. They obviously can do things like Key Club, that is a district-sponsored event, but it's equally as likely that they might, for example, we've got some students that are volunteering over at the Pine Hollow Arboretum. We've got a lot of students that volunteer doing senior services kinds of things, and it's phenomenal because the impact to our community is tremendously tangible, and as we develop the ability to push that downward to younger students, we'll just increase that, obviously, to scale. So I mentioned some of our goals, but before I got into the goals, one of the really exciting developments that Passport for Good has just added is these categories of service. So at the middle school, when we talk to students about what engagement is, we talk to students about just showing up. So we don't want them to feel intimidated by showing up to something where there's a group, a club, maybe it's a community service group. All they have to do is show up, and students who have been there for a while, know the routines, will help them, lead them, do those kinds of things. And then it's also, Passport for Good will track leadership. So students who go above and beyond and provide something more than just showing up will have that documented in Passport for Good. So it's another affirmation of how students are contributing to the groups that they are. And then, of course, I mentioned the internship hours, typically going probably only to be used with high school students. We typically don't have a lot of middle school students doing internships, although it's not atypical. A student certainly could do that. And then they also have a new feature called community service. So, for example, compare two clubs, like Key Club at the high school and the chess club at the middle school. Chess club doesn't necessarily provide a community service. It's really self-serving. Kids come to learn and play chess. However, Key Club is one of the biggest volunteer groups in our high school. Their membership has been as high as more than 200 students, and they typically do lots of service in and around the community, both within the school and outside the school. So those events, when you show up to chess club, would be considered either engagement, maybe leadership if you're teaching other students. But every time you show up to Key Club, you're not only getting an engagement hour, you're also developing perhaps leadership, but certainly community service. And then some of the other, again, a reference back to some of the district goals that we put up on the previous slides. One thank you that's related to this whole domain of student engagement. We have had huge conflicts because of how many students are starting to get involved in activities, both at the middle school and high school. So as those in the room are probably familiar with, when you guys were here at the middle school, we had late buses on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, same at the high school. Because of all the conflicts, and like, for example, if you wanted to show up for Key Club and maybe Student Senate and they met on the same day, you kind of had to pick and choose, and that was unfortunate. So by adding late buses on Fridays, which was a Board of Education decision last year through our budget process, we now have been able to open up and create greater flexibility for our staff and for our students, not to mention students that want to go see teachers to get extra help if they've fallen behind or just were absent from school. So thank you to the board, central administration, and obviously our community who voted on this last spring. So we anticipate being able to scale our students' engagement because of the addition of that one additional day. So thank you for that. And at this point, I'll take any questions. And I may defer a lot of those to Gail.
So particularly with external activities, how do you validate that what a student is reporting is actually happening?
So in the process, so let me use Pine Hollow, the Arboretum as an example. Pine Hollow has an executive director. The student, there's 2 students, high school students right now, who are engaged in either internships or creating some multimedia presentations for the Arboretum. When they set up their service to the Arboretum, they reach out to the executive director, they set up meeting times, they use her email address, and every time they show up on site, they log those hours, and the program, the app, Passport for Good, actually generates a verification email that the executive director has to respond to. So the student doesn't get credit for those hours until that executive director responds to it, and then that feeds directly back into the system. So for example, Mr. Irons, who runs the Participation in Government, the PIG program, where the community services is accounted for, he doesn't have to ever make contact with the exec director at the Arboretum because all of her work is done virtually, and through the communication between the students, the executive director in this case, and then the app, Mr. Irons has all the verification he needs that the students completed their service.
Anyone else?
I remember talking to Gail about this, I don't know how long ago it was, but I think it was in the initial stages of creating the program. And I went on last year because I was excited because I remember talking about it to see how well it worked and some of the tools with it. And I thought it was great. And just these new additions and enhancements are going to be a really great tool. I believe Lab School was using it last year for volunteer service.
Correct.
And the seniors. And I'm sure they're very happy with all, because every grade had to log their volunteer hours, that it's relieving a lot of energy on their end too.
So 2 comments to that. When Nick and Jody and I were having these conversations 7 and 8 years ago, right at the outset when we were talking to Gail, we couldn't believe that we couldn't find something out there that did this. I think Gail would be the first person to tell you, as simple as all of this sounds, it's a really convoluted and complicated process. And in the domain or the world of app, it's really competitive. So when you come up with a great idea, there's usually somebody, you have to rush to get to market and prove your concept because the niche can fill up so quickly with competitors, and there really hasn't been a lot of competition because of Passport for Good's success at doing so well what they've developed in this application.
It's great, thank you.
Just want to say thank you to Bethlehem for sticking with us when we were in the early days of development, and for all of your feedback so that we've been able to make a better product, a product that meets your needs. We're really looking forward to having student feedback consistently, constantly, administrative feedback, so that we can continue to make improvements. That's how software gets built and improved. And I just want to let the board know too that we are the first of its category to be approved by state by BOCES.
Excellent.
Software. So we're really, really proud of that, and look forward to working with you all.
Thank you.
Just one quick question. It is an awesome program. I can see kids loving this. Some of the more competitive kids, trying to rack up 8 trillion hours. I think it's going to be awesome. My question is, though, for the more reluctant or shy or kids that just don't want to do it, is how do you entice them? How do you draw them in? Because I think it's something that once you try it once, I think they're going to get interested. But how do you cross that first step, make that first step?
So I'm going to talk in both practical and theoretical terms. In a conference call that Mark and I had with one of Gail's developers last week, Mark described basically how he runs his garden club and described a really streamlined process that would both serve an attendance function and a verification function. And in that function, we think, and I think the developers think, if we scale this K-12 now, so if we get elementary students in this, the additional concern to yours is the technical capacity of kids to be able to manage and navigate the system. We think in the design flow that Mark described, and that I think Alicia commented to being able to do, one of Gail's developers, it's going to facilitate younger students to develop some momentum into the app. It will allow facilitators to do most of the heavy lifting, because I think the other really important point to remember, from kindergarten through 8th grade for the most part, almost all of the documenting that students will do will be on-site or through some adult. So even if it's off-site, if it's like a Girl or Boy Scouts function, the facilitator can facilitate the logging in process through this new attendance function that will also provide the verification. So students really won't have to navigate within the app too much. They'll still have their own user domain, and they'll see the accumulation of hours and the affirmation of what that means. So we think what's going to happen is we'll take care of it extrinsically kind of at the start, and as they start to see how it works, as they age into the program, they'll develop greater and greater proficiency to take it over.
Are you using the data in any other way? Are you analyzing trends? What else can we gain from this besides the students' usage of it?
In a scheduling domain, not necessarily student data, but with regard to what potential community outfits or community interests there are, so we can push those to other students who may be looking for service opportunities. We think that there's a largely untapped potential. You may recall at my presentation talking about engagement last spring, we did a survey in the middle school, and somewhere between 40 and 44% of students indicate through a self-indication, so it's like a self-surveying kind of modality. They do nothing. There was no engagement, no participation, no community service hours. So when you scale that, if we can get to 90, 95, 100% of our students being invested in the community and providing services that now serve both an intrinsic good but also the community, we think we're going to have a boon for the folks around Bethlehem that our kids will support.
Are you going to be looking at that data to reach out to those 40% of the kids? Is this a way to identify those kids and make some personal connections with them?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
in the middle school, I think what we're primarily going to push to the kids is the in-house activity, primarily because I think it's a big reach for a kid who's never been engaged to go out into the community, maybe go find an adult they don't know, when they can connect with one of their teachers right here in-house. At the high school, though, where every senior has to fulfill 20 hours, I think we would definitely, and they can do that now, when they log into the system, they can see every agent that has provided some form of community service or function or event that kids have participated in. So it's a way for kids who are just kind of novices coming into the system to get ideas about what other entities are out there. So there's a lot of kids that are working at shelters and working at food banks, and all that information is stored in the system. And as the information is stored about the entities that are participating, there's no student information about their peers, like who's participating, so it doesn't have that social medium kind of feel that like a Facebook or something like that would.
And I think tailgating on yours is, Chris, is notification, so if the PTAs need assistance, the students can be, there'll be an area where they can be notified of the.
Gail, am I correct that one of the new features is a calendaring process, right? So they'll be able to push things out?
Be able to see the calendar.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So what a great way.
So you mean like an elementary school PTA could say, oh, we need some help with our picnic this weekend?
You got it.
You put it on the calendar, and then seniors could sign up to help through that?
Yeah, so
Oh,
I was
okay.
going to say exactly what you're thinking, which is like Ellesmere might not want to necessarily push to a kindergartner. They might want to go out to their old Ellesmere alumni and get juniors and seniors who can drive and do those kinds of things, and they'll be able to do that.
Interesting.
And when you have no free time, Gail, you can maybe have it interface with Naviance on the resume aspect, and then that'll save all the juniors.
Well, what I know about Gail is if we can think it, she's probably already started to design it, so I'm sure that may be coming.
Can I ask you? Question in the back here?
Is that Kelly back there with a question?
Go ahead, Kelly.
Okay. I was just wondering if the app was tested for accessibility with screen readers for blind
Oh.
people and dyslexic people.
So is it screen readers for visually impaired students that want to be able to take advantage of it?
We are working on our ADA compliance. We're not there yet, but that is something that, our developers are very aware of, and hopefully, be able to decide
So I had 3 questions. One was the one that the young lady just asked. The other 2 were, and you might have covered it and I missed it, was whether or not a student needs to own a personal smartphone in order to access the program.
No, they can do it right through their Chromebook.
Okay, perfect. And then the other was about how we're protecting the information, particularly where students are going during different times of the day and logging in.
Do you want to?
Yeah, so, you know, privacy and security is, you know, another one of our huge priorities. And so we have, you know, our policies posted on our website, but we're working on making sure that we're, you know, adhering to the strictest security and privacy policies. And we are stored on the Azure cloud, the Microsoft Azure cloud. And we are not, you know, the students, there's no communication to the student directly from the outside through the app. So it's not the social media type of an application. And if we need to provide, you know, any more questions specifically about the degree of security, we can certainly take that offline. But we are, you know, providing compliance with FERPA, COPA, you know, all of the obligations under, you know, the BOCES contract and everything else that we have to comply with. So, sure.
Anyone else? Thank you, Michael.
Thanks,
and Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Next, we have public comment period for anyone who has any comments on an agenda item. The board recently updated its guidelines for public comments, so please forgive me. It's rather lengthy, but I'm going to read this. The board values and welcomes civil, respectful statements and clear, concise communications that inform its deliberations. The board uses the public comment period as an opportunity to listen to citizen concerns, but will not debate issues or enter into a question and answer session. It is also important that no person addressing the board initiate charges or complaints about individual board members or employees or students of the district. Such charges or complaints should be presented directly to the superintendent. Speakers are encouraged to provide the board with a written copy of their comments and other appropriate supporting documentation, but is not required. To address the Board of Education, please, 1, wait to be called upon by the board president. 2, at the microphone, please state your full name. 3, direct your comments to the board. Do not turn and speak to the audience. 4, keep your comments as concise as possible. 5, speakers are expected to treat others with respect, confining their remarks to school district issues. And 6, do not use the public speaking portion of board meetings to make personal statements about any individual or engage in any commentary that is slanderous or abusive. The board president may rule any speaker out of order who makes such statements. So if there are any comments, if you could go up to the microphone there and state your name. No one? Okay. And we will move on. Next is the finance action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 through 3.
So moved. Second.
Okay, any comment? We would like to thank the BCAA girls volleyball and the middle school green team for the donations that are under consideration. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Professional personnel action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 8.
So moved. Second.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any Any objections? Any abstentions? That passes. Support personnel action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any comments? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Other action items. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1 through 6.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. Now we will recognize any visitors on a non-agenda item. No? PIG students are very lucky tonight.
The right meeting.
Okay, future meetings and events. As mentioned, on Monday, there will be an audit committee meeting and also a policy committee meeting. That's Monday, September 24th. Wednesday, October 3rd, there is a regular board meeting at 7 with an anticipated executive session at 6 p.m. And that will be at the high school. And on Wednesday, October 17th, there is a regular board meeting at 7 with an anticipated executive session at 6 p.m. And that one will be held at Hammergrail Elementary. And there's no reason for us to go back into executive session, so can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Thank you all for attending, and PIG students, make sure you come up and sign out, and if you need anything signed for your teacher, let us know.